it's that time of the week again. It's time for Programming by Stealth, and this is installment 175, recorded February 1st, 2025. I'm your host, Allison Sheridan, and of course, I'm joined by your co-host, Bart Bouchatz. How are you doing today, Bart?
I am doing good. And I've just realized we've managed to do this a few times now. We're starting a new topic on a roundy number, 175.
Oh, there we go. There we go. It is round. Well, round is 5 round.
It is significant. To me. It's a quarter. 4 is round. It's a quarter.
I'm excited about this topic. This is going to be fun. I think you set it up last time of where we were going to go. And now that I've pre-read the show notes, I'm going to be itching to get through this one, to get to the next one, and then to the next one, and then to the next one.
Yeah. Well, the good news is this one and the next 2 are written. After that, I haven't written them yet, but I'm hoping I'll have caught up by then.
Oh, you made good use of your time off. That's great.
I also needed to be sure I understood the foundation because I actually wrote them out of order. So the next 2 were written first, and then I went back in time and wrote this one.
Okay. Well, we've been teasing the topic. In case people don't know the topic, it is GitHub Pages.
It is, which is an extremely versatile platform for hosting a website for free. So on one end of the spectrum, you can give it some HTML and some CSS and some JavaScript and just have it hosted. Just, some static files, put them on the internet. And on the other end of the spectrum, you actually have a full content management system, which is on par feature-wise with something you could have from WordPress, which is a more traditional database-driven content management system, or with the very fashionable new up-and-comer Hugo, which is a different type of content management system called a static site generator. So GitHub Pages is more that way.
Hugo before.
Oh, it's all over. I keep hearing all the nerds talk about it, and if you Google for top CMS, it's always at the top of the list now. It's very fashionable. But I didn't like it any better than Jekyll, which is what GitHub Pages uses, and GitHub Pages just does this. It's just there. So why would you go use something else?
All right, we're getting ahead of ourselves talking about Jekyll.
We are. So I'm going to actually spend this installment focusing on what it is that a content management system like WordPress or a static site generator like GitHub Pages or Hugo is actually for. Like, what's the problem to be solved? That's a very NosillaCast question, and I'm going to adopt it here on Programming by Stealth. And then we're going to look at how GitHub Pages addresses that. So to understand where we're going in the series, I want to give you like the floor plan. And we'll have to spend some time in each room and to get to know all the different things. But I think it's easier to learn each individual piece if we know that they are part of a bigger picture. And then hope, because there's quite a few new technologies and they sort of interact with each other. So I can't do that thing where I teach you everything about one thing and then everything about the next thing. I'm going to have to do like a little bit of each and then a little bit more of each and then a little bit more of each and sort of build it up, which is different. But again, if you see the full shape, I'm hoping it works better.
Okay. It sounds like fun.
Yeah. So your 2 different architectures for content management systems or CMS platforms there's 2 different ways of doing it, but they're all trying to do the same it. And broadly speaking, you can put it into 3 really big problems. So the first problem to be solved is you separate the content from the presentation. So when you're writing content, you're focusing on what you want to say, and you're not at all distracted by how it should look. You're just thinking about what is it. And then it's a whole separate problem, which may be your problem or another human being's problem, depending on how big an organization you are, which is, well, we have this content, we now have to present it to the world, and we need to do that in a way that is easy to navigate, easy on the eye, accessible to people with disabilities and so forth. But that's a different problem. And even if you're solving both...
I want to interrupt for a second. I've just thought of a perfect explanation of what is terrible and could be better if it was like this. When you sit down to write a presentation and you have to use PowerPoint, You spend about 40% of your time trying to make the font the right size and then pick the right bullets. And are you going to indent this line? And how are you going to move it around and the colors and all those things? What if when you wrote a presentation, all you had was the text you wanted to get across, and all you did was write these bullets and you never had to do any of that. And then the formatting was always what you wanted it to be. That's what these content management systems do. You just write.
Yes.
And then, but you've already pre-decided that heading level 2 is going to be blue and it's going to be bold and it's going to be this big. And you don't have to make those decisions as you go along because the presentation of it has already been decided. And by you.
Potentially by you, or if you're part of a larger organization, you might break that into different teams with different experts, but it could be you, but you don't wear the two hats at the same time. I am now in designer mode, or I am now in creator mode. You get to do them separately. And the separation's actually at a couple of levels. So obviously the task level is the most important separation. I am either creating or I am styling, but you don't do the two at once. The other separation's at the storage level. So when you're backing stuff up, you actually want it to be plausible to say, I just want the content or I just want the style. So in WordPress land, you have a theme which you can literally separate out and give to someone else, and they don't get any of your posts, nothing. They just get the look of your site. Or you can ask WordPress to export all of your posts, and it comes out, I think, an OPML file. And then you can import that into someone else's WordPress with their theme, and it'll be your content, but it'll look at 100% different. So they're separated at two levels. And then the other reason you want them separated is because you should be able to change your mind independently. So you did this on podfeet.com some time ago now, but if people have been listening for ages and ages and ages, they will remember your website was completely different. And then you found a better theme you liked more. You spent a bit of time figuring it out on a test site. And then one weekend, we arrived to find a whole new podfeet.com. But all your content,
and that's the last time I styled anything, and that was
it is actually
that's a lot more than 5 years ago, probably more like 7 or 8.
I've lost track. Yeah,
quite a ways back. It's actually there's been 3 themes, and the funny thing is I've kept the old themes, so I could right now while we're talking, I could flip to the old theme, and all of a sudden, well, it ends up looking kind of poopy because of some new content that doesn't fit into the old theme. But yeah, I could flip it back.
Yeah. It'd be a bit weird. You'd freak people out. Actually, that'd be April 1st.
There you go.
So that's your separations. That's your biggest, your big top level problem. Another big top level problem is that the content has to be organized in some sort of a sensible way. And the word people use to describe organization of content is a taxonomy. So if you think about a biologist, they break everything in nature down into families and kingdoms and species and subspecies. That is a taxonomy for biology. Physicists break the nuclear particles into different taxonomies as well. You know, you have leptons and,
muons?
Didn't think ahead.
Is it muons?
Muons are leptons. Electrons are leptons. Yeah, I'm stuck on the ons now. The enos are something else. Anyway. So that's called the taxonomy, and it's a very generic term intentionally because
I love that you're describing this. You know me so well, Bart. I looked up the word taxonomy to see if I understood what you meant in this context.
I thought you might
when I did the pre-read.
And so it's actually quite a flexible word because sometimes it makes sense to organize your site by categories, right? There are times when every post fits into one box and one box only. Now, an extra complication is that some content management systems let you sort of do a Schrodinger's post and say that this one post is in multiple categories, but some content management...
Security bits is in the blog post category and it's in the security bits category. So you can get to it either way.
WordPress allows you to have multiple categories on one piece of content. Some content management systems are much more strictly folder. You must be in a folder, like a file, right? You have to be in one place. And another taxonomy is tags. So sometimes your actual primary organization is just date. Maybe you just do a stream of consciousness sort of a blog and it's just complete random glop and it doesn't have categories. It's just what I'm thinking about today. And then you use tags to put some sort of order on it where someone goes, oh, wow, that was really fun. That was a math joke. I'll click on the math tag and I'll see all the other math stuff in this giant big mess of different things. So taxonomies can be varied and there's no right answer.
Well, there's also taxonomies with like comments are a taxonomy versus posts versus pages, for example, if you're talking WordPress. So a page is something that's just always there. Like my homepage is a page. It isn't a post, and they tend to not change, and they tend to not be dated usually. They're just this is an informational thing.
Yes, exactly. And that's quite a common breakdown where you have the word used is either post or article or page. And the pages are your long-lasting content. Precisely.
That would be a page, yeah. Okay, so those are the kind of taxonomies. But there needs to be something like that.
Right, exactly. So the job of a content management system is to give you the ability to say, this piece of content fits into this bigger structure of my choosing in this way. And then the theme's job is to put some sort of sense on that and say, well, I'm going to display everything in this category on this nice page, and I'm going to display a list of categories over here, and I'm going to display a tag cloud over there, or whatever. So the theme is using the taxonomy to organize the content without really knowing anything about the content. It's just like, well, I'm going to put posts here and pages here, and I'm going to make a menu here, and it doesn't know what they are, and it doesn't care, because the content is different from the taxonomy, but the content specifies where it goes.
Right.
And then the other thing you need is some sort of editorial process. And this is such a spectrum. So for you and for me, or especially for you on Podfeet, you have a very simple editorial process. Posts start as a draft, which means you see them, but the general public don't. You edit them until you're happy, and then you publish them. Or maybe you set them to publish automatically, but that's basically your two-step process, right? Draft, published. But if you were writing for the New York Times, that's not how it would work, right? You would write an article and you would be happy with it, and then you would submit it into a process where your line editor would check over it. It might go to a headline editor whose only job is to add a headline, and then it would go to the final editor.
Clickbait.
Make it clickbait, absolutely. Clicky, clicky, click, click. Reword a few things, pick a few, those quotes that go bigger on a newspaper, right? That's another person's job. And then eventually someone gets the final thumbs up, thumbs down, and then it appears on the website. So that's a really complicated editorial process. But a content management system has to allow you to do what you want, where you are a person or organization.
Is part of that roles?
Yes, absolutely.
I've given you the same. I think you have the same privileges I do on.
I'm an admin. Wow.
On podfeet.com. And then I think Steve does too, which is even scarier, but luckily you can roll everything back. Which, by the way, when I borked something this week, I destroyed last week's Nosilicast, and I was like looking through backups, and it happened right before the most recent backup, and I couldn't find it, blah, blah, blah. And Steve goes, well, why don't you just go into WordPress and roll it back? Oh yeah, I forgot. Yeah, WordPress is a very mature product, so it absolutely gives you all of that kind of stuff very easy. Okay. If you remember to look for it in the UI. Yes.
So they are the problem to be solved, and they are just universal. So it doesn't actually matter technologically how you achieve these three things. This is what it means to be a content management system. So let's look at how you make them. And this is where there are two completely different answers to the same question. And it's not that one of them is right and one of them is wrong. It's that one of them will be a better fit for you in your situation, and another one will be a better fit for other people in other situations. And in my case, I found one of them was a better fit for me 20 years ago, and I now realize it's not the best fit for me now. So I'm going to change from one to the other. So I don't want to say this is the right answer and that WordPress thing is the wrong answer, because that's not how it works. It's just there are two options and you should pick the one that works for you. I've done both. They're both great. There's reasons to pick either, right? So no shade here.
Good.
So the two worldviews are called dynamic and static. And at the end of the day, you always end up with content that gets turned into a website by some sort of theme. And that website is HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, because that is the internet, or that is the language of the web. And that's what people see in their browsers. So your big questions are, when do you turn the content into the HTML, CSS, and JavaScript? And where do you store the content? At the end, there has to be content, and it has to get converted. When and where do you store it? And in theory, those two questions aren't linked, right? In theory, there should be 4 possibilities, because you have 2 variables. So in theory, that means 4 different ways of doing things. But in reality, they are kind of connected together, and we end up with these 2 worldviews. So I'm going to start with the WordPress view, which is read time rendering, or dynamic content management system platform. So, and WordPress is like, it runs almost, what is it, 3/4 of the internet or something? WordPress is astonishingly successful. Yeah, it's big. I'm not quite sure how you measure the internet, but it is
if it's just
substantial.
Counting pages? Yeah.
Right, do you count pages? Do you count page views? Because that's very different.
Sites?
Websites, domains. Right, how do you count? Yeah, anyway, it doesn't matter. It's big. It's a big player. And so read time rendering tells you that the point in time that changed the translation from content in some sort of format to HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, that happens at the moment in time someone's browser arrives and says, "Hello, I'd like to read your post." It is built right there on demand at the point in time it's being read.
Now, within a
millisecond,
there's caching too sometimes, right? Like if you've just asked for it and then Joe from the Northwoods asked for it, it might not re-render it, but it'll have some sort of time to live and do it again.
Yeah, and in effect, it kind of is re-rendering, but the choice is, do I render it from first principles, or do I just go fetch it from the cache and re-render what I was given from the cache?
Oh, good point. Good point. Yeah, it is still rendering it. Yeah.
Still rendering it, yeah.
One's a little faster.
You're asking a URL that is a program that goes and makes the stuff versus asking a URL that is a file.
Okay. Right.
So that yeah.
I get the distinction.
So literally, at the point in time you go to podfeet.com, Alison has a server that sits there. Here is your question. It goes, okay, grand. And then it goes and talks to a database, because WordPress has saved all of the posts Alison has ever written and every comment. It's all in a database. And then, so this web server running PHP executes some PHP code, connects to the database, assembles the page that's needed, generates it all with the cool theme Alison has, and then spits out some HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, goes back to the browser and renders on your screen. And it's kind of amazing that happens quickly. That's kind of cool.
Well, yeah, you've had me point money at that to make that happen as quickly as it does, having a separate database server and a separate web server, and the work that you and Bill Reveal have done to make it all go in Nginx in the background, and everything that wasn't without cost.
Yeah. And so that kind of brings us to, how do we start thinking about the pros and cons of this? And one obvious feature of this architecture is that it's somewhat complex. So you're going to have a Linux or a Windows server running some sort of web server software like Nginx or Apache, and then it has to run PHP. For WordPress, it does. It could be a different language for another content management system. You need a database server. That database has to exist in a server, so that needs some sort of server. And then there's the WordPress code itself that's also, a part of this system here. So you had to install that WordPress code. You have to manage that code. It has security updates every time I turn my back. It seems to get one. Mm-hmm. So you've all of that.
I thought of another piece that's in there is I don't know that it's possible to run a WordPress site without at least one plugin.
Yeah, which is part of the code, but it's not part of the code.
It's not part of the WordPress code. It's another complexity, right? If nothing else, you're going to run the Akismet plugin that stops spam. Millions and millions and millions of spam.
Yeah. Yeah. And in a bigger site, you're probably going to run that through not just the caching WordPress does itself, but you're going to run it through a much, much bigger cache, something like Cloudflare, or as it has all sorts of fancy acronyms like a content delivery network, CDN, all these cool terms come into it as well. So for the New York Times or whatever, their architecture is even more complicated than this. And the server has work to do. So you had to pay a bigger bill now than you did 20 years ago because you have more visitors, which means your server has more work to do. And your server has to be big enough to handle the most amount of simultaneous viewers. That's what matters when you're trying to size the server. Right? What is the most people try to look at my website at the same time? That determines the spike. And so you need to have your server big enough for that spike. And over time, as you make a better and better podcast, the spike gets taller, which means the server needs to do more. The WordPress software gets more complicated. So maybe even if the people stay the same, you'd still need more CPU and RAM. And so you got to scale, which is arguably a nice problem, but it does mean that you have to ask the listeners for some help or run some ads if you're the New York Times. But so there's obviously advantages to the more complex infrastructure, because your content is published instantly, right? If you hit publish within a second or so, that post is live. With the other type of system, there will be a delay. It will be it will not be less than half a minute. It could well be a minute, could well be 2 minutes. You don't have that with a dynamic system. The content can be published really, really often. So if you can imagine a website like the New York Times, they're not going to post one post a week. I mean, you don't even do that. You post separate. Your one podcast episode is actually a lot of different blog posts because you're posting stuff throughout the week. So even you're posting at a higher rate than people might expect. But a big site with a bunch of authors, even just Ars Technica or something, their post rate's going to be quite high. So a dynamic system does not care if you have a high rate of posting. Perfectly happy with that. Your user interactions can be saved straight into the content management system. So you mentioned that in WordPress universe, comments are a different taxonomy. They are content, they have an author, it's just not you. It's your site visitors. So in terms of WordPress's database, it's just a different taxonomy. And it has different data fields and it gets rendered in different places in the theme, but it's just a piece of content. With the other type of system, you have to do your user comments and your user interaction separately to your content because there's nowhere to put it. The other thing you tend to get with these dynamic systems is it's all in a single web interface. So there's one URL which your visitors use to view your site, and your author is used to add content, and your editor is used to do their bit of the workflow. It's all one web interface, a bit like using Gmail or whatever. That's a level of simplicity that's very suited to a lot of environments. Right? It's a web page.
Once all the complexity you just described is done, once you and Bill Reveal have done all the heavy lifting and I've done the theme part, then I don't ever deal with that again. You're right. It's a perfect description to call it being like Gmail. I go to a website. I mean, I happen to use Mars Edit to write my blog post, so I make it more complicated on purpose, but because I like writing that way. But I can just go to the web all the time to that one URL and do my work.
Yeah. And when I do a guest Nosilicast, or when Alistair does one, or when Jill does one, we just log into that web page and we really, really, really don't need to know about all the stuff that Bill and everyone has helped you with, right? It's just a web interface.
Right.
And you also have the advantage that especially the content creator doesn't need much technical stuff. And you also have this giant community that you're just tapping into, right? Oh, I really wish it was possible to do blah. Go look on the list of plugins. Yeah, someone solved that problem, right?
Like, I want a rotating carousel of images. Boom, there's a plugin to do that. I want to have I want to sell some products. There's a plugin to do that. WooCommerce, whatever it is. There's millions of them.
Millions.
And the themes too.
and themes. Just
you
plain
can
up
buy them.
themes.
You can get them for free.
Yeah, big spectrum. Yeah. So, like I say, it's pros and cons, right? You have some complexity, but you have a nice feature set, so you get something of value.
And it costs a lot of money.
Yeah, money is definitely one of the features.
Those servers that I'm paying for, those are not inexpensive. I paid in complexity and in dollars.
Yes,
to get it working.
So time is money, etc.
Yeah.
So then you have the other universe, the publication time rendering, or to give it its proper name, static site generators. And GitHub Pages is an example of a static site generator. And I almost think of it as like a completely different view of the universe to a dynamic. So the entire site, everything on your web page gets turned into HTML, CSS, and JavaScript at the moment in time you publish some new content. So when we publish the next edition of these show notes, the act of saying make PBS 175 live will generate the entire website as HTML, CSS, and JavaScript files, and then they will just be there on the web server as just HTML files until 2 weeks from now when we do it again.
Right.
They're just static files.
Just pages. Yeah. So your rendering is nothing. It's exactly. Really fast.
Yeah, because all the server is doing is fetching the HTML that's sitting there and handing it over. It's just funneling files. It's not calculating anything. It's just funneling files. Also means that the infrastructure you need is way simpler, right? Because you can buy web hosting for HTML, CSS, and JavaScript from HostGator or whatever you're using for like a pittance. Like, how much bandwidth do you want? A terabyte a month. Oh, you don't need PHP. You don't need a database. That won't cost you very much. Right? They'll sell it to you for these giant amounts of bandwidth. So, if you're doing like Daring Fireball is an example of a very high traffic static site generator. So John can avoid the kind of server bills that would probably bankrupt a one-person operation like John by having it be a static site generator. His hosting is trivial.
Interesting. So why do they make it cheap to have a lot of bandwidth?
Well, because all you're paying for is basically, it's effectively like paying only for the content delivery network and not needing any compute. So in terms of what you're paying for your hosting, the compute on the RAM disappears and all they're doing is providing you the equivalent of the cache. So it's almost like taking a complex WordPress deployment and just having the cache. And you update the cache once a week, once a month or whatever. And other than that, there is nothing else. So you're not paying for the bit further back.
That makes sense.
Yeah. Now, it's obviously swings and roundabouts here. So actually, let me back up a sec. So it is rendered at the point of publication. Great. Where's the content stored before the point of publication? Right? We're saving the content in a database for the dynamic system. Where does the content go with a static site generator? The answer is it's a folder of files. So you're going to have a folder of files. You're going to have a piece of software called your static site generator that takes as input content and produces as output HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And that output then has to end up on the web server. And the input doesn't. The input is not needed again until the next time there's an update when you again take that input, convert it, and then you have your new version of the website until the next time. Which does allow you to separate things a bit. So if you're just a one-person operation, you could literally keep your content on your PC, by which I mean personal computer, not Windows PC, right? Your Mac is a PC in my little universe here.
Yeah, let's call it personal computer.
Yeah. So you could actually just have a folder sitting on your computer in your My Documents folder next to your Word files and your Excel sheets and all that kind of stuff. Just a little folder called My Website. And in there would just be some files and you'd install an app. And then every time you wanted to update your web page, you'd edit the files at, whatever way you'd like to, run your little generator app, and that'll make you some HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And then you just got to put it on a web server. So you could open up your favorite file transfer client, connect to some silly web hosting somewhere, and just drag and drop your files across. And you might do that once a week, once a month or whatever, and that would work fine. Again, fine for a one-person operation. But if you're going to do this for a bigger operation, you're going to need to be a little more complicated than that. So what you might want to do is put the static site generator on a server somewhere. So if you were in an Office-y universe, you could imagine a Windows machine sitting in the corner of the office somewhere or whatever, running a Samba file share, where everyone just connects to the file share called the website. They edit the files or whatever, and then maybe you have a little script that runs at midnight every night and just runs the static site generator to make the HTML and CSS and then copies it off to a web server somewhere. And again, the web server doesn't have to be the Samba file share. So from a security point of view, you don't have to expose your content files to the internet. The only thing that goes to the internet is the output of that task.
Oh, right. Oh, okay. So doing the generation is fine locally and then pushing it out.
And you push it out. Exactly. And you can add as many or as few layers of complexity as you like, but ultimately that's what you're doing, right? You have a folder of files that are the content. They go through an app of some sort and out comes a website, and then you put the website on the internet. Now, if we zoom out a little bit and we don't think in terms of content, we just sort of put our programming by stealth hat on, this is actually basically the same as software development, right? You don't write the app in the format that it ends up on the App Store. You have a folder of files. It goes through some sort of an app to make some sort of a thing you run, and that something you run gets published somewhere. So the software development toolkit has solved this problem using, well, there's lots of different solutions, but a really, really, really nice solution that fits really well with static site generators is a content management system like Git, and a series of things we've mentioned in a hand-waving way in the past couple of months. I've been kind of intentionally dropping it in. It has a silly acronym, CI/CD, and it's continuous integration / continuous development. It has a slash in it because no one can even decide on what the bloody name is, right? It's basically, we had an argument of what to call this vague concept. There were two answers, so we put both of them into the acronym. It's a terrible acronym.
It's a committee name.
It is absolutely a committee name, a consensus name, a compromise. But anyway, what it means is when something happens in Git, some scripts run and do something useful. That's all it is, right? It's some scripts that get triggered by Git. And so if you think about that in terms of a publication system, that means that maybe you commit content to a branch called for review, and you, as the person writing the content, only have permission on the for review branch. Your editor has read and write permission on that branch. So your editor says, okay, well, that's a nice post from Bob. I'm going to fix that typo here. Oh, look, you put a dash in the wrong place. Must be Bart wrote this. It makes their changes. And then they submit it to a different branch called for executive approval or something. The final editor gives it a final look. And then it goes to another branch, which triggers the static site generator, which pushes it live. Entirely plausible. Okay. Now, if you think about it for programming by stealth, we have a publication process. Or an editorial process. It's a little bit simpler than what I've just described, right? You and I have the same role, which is full power. So I can publish an installment of Programming by Stealth, and you can publish an installment of Programming by Stealth. As soon as something gets pushed to the main branch, which I think is still called master because this repository is so old, but it's the main branch anyway, whatever it's called.
Going forward, they're called main.
Yes, and modern Git repositories are called main for obvious reasons. As soon as a commit lands on that branch, a CI/CD pipeline kicks in that runs a static site generator to turn a bunch of markdown files, which is what myself and Alison actually edit, into the pretty web page you see, which runs through a theme I wrote about a decade ago. It's a pretty theme, but I wrote it a decade ago before I kind of knew what I was doing. So it's a theme I would never suggest anyone use as an example of the right way to do things. But it does do the job of turning Markdown into a web page. And then the CI/CD pipeline takes the generated HTML, CSS, and JavaScript and puts it on the internet at pbs.bartificer.net. And that is actually all done using GitHub Pages, which is the content management system we use. But so that's one part of the editorial process. You and I can just do that. But we have other creators, our listeners.
Right.
So
one thing I wanted to jump in there real quick was, I don't know that you've said it explicitly, is there's a constant push and pull going on that we're using Git to do the writing. So Bart does the show notes. He tells me, okay, they're ready for review. And if we're lucky, Allison reads them ahead of time so that she doesn't ask quite as many dumb questions that slow the whole thing down. And then, so I pull those from GitHub, and then I edit, and then I push them back up. Bart pulls them back down, decides whether he agrees with it. We go back and forth 2 or 3 times, and then we're ready to go. And then at the end, I'm doing editing while we're talking, catching a typo here and there, maybe adding a clarification, finally push it up, and then Steve Mattin comes back and tells us everything that we missed.
Exactly. So that's the other part of our editorial process. So Steve is cool, and we really appreciate him. He's a fantastic proofreader. But he doesn't have the power to change this website. He has the power to suggest a change using a pull request in Git, because we're using Git. And then you and I have the power to review that pull request. And I don't remember ever saying no to one, but in theory we could. I don't think we have.
Right.
Yeah.
No.
Because our listeners rock. So that is an editorial process, right? There are 2 people who are just full-on editors, and then the entire world is allowed to submit stuff, which we review and then decide whether or not to publish. So that is a process, just a simple one. And it's nicely managed by Git, because Git is a good fit for static site generators. And so again, we're into pros and cons. So the infrastructure requirements are so much simpler, which means cheaper. Right? As you've already hinted, complexity means money, which means a need to do ads or whatever. You're also not going to find good, free WordPress hosting. It's going to have a catch, either a limit on bandwidth, a limit on posts, or it's some sort of an ad-supported model where they inject ads into your blog, right?
And you don't necessarily know what ads are going to show up.
Yeah, all the problems that come with ads, right? God only knows what you'll end up, pimping on your site. It can be disturbing. So, the simplicity definitely is a pro. And if you, the content creator, are the kind of person who spends time in text editors, who sees writing in something like Markdown as a feature, not a bug, because you want to be completely undistracted and you just want to type, I want this to be a header, 1 octothorpe. I want this to be a second level header, 2 octothorpes. If that's a feature, not a bug, then this is an amazing fit for you. Right? Use your favorite editor, and you're probably very picky about editors if you're one of our people, right? And you use your favorite Git tools that you're using all the time for all your other nerdy stuff. And so it's a nice fit. So for all the reasons that a typical person writing for Ars Technica might really love the web interface, the Gmail style approach, other people actually don't like that. They much prefer the Gitty style approach, right? Because that's the kind of people you are. So it may fit you. You can't do a site that has like an article every minute, because the static site generator would just get completely overwhelmed. It's going to take easily a minute or 2 for the full pipeline, right? You push to Git, the pipeline starts to run. It clones the repository onto a temporary server. It runs the static site generator. It makes the HTML. It pushes it up to the actual public web server. That's not instant. And you can watch that within the GitHub interface. You can watch it happen. It's a little 3-step process. And it takes 45 seconds for the first step on average and about 30 seconds for the second step. So if you can imagine a website like Ars Technica where there might be a post every minute, it's literally not going to keep up, right? It's literally not going to work.
Even for somebody like me, Bart, I'm impatient. You've seen me stomping my tiny little foot, because when the last thing I do before I start spamming the internet that we posted a new thing is I have to wait until I can see it on pbs.bartificer.net. And that time is 700 years long when it takes more than 30 seconds. I mean, it drives me nuts. And to be fair, sometimes it does get stuck. Not often,
Yes.
but I have seen it get stuck, and I've bellyached to Helma to help me fix it, and just like, oh, just try it again. The other thing is GitHub does have a GitHub Pages that we're going to be talking about here as our static site generator does have a limit of 10 site builds per hour. So you can't do one every minute.
Infinity. Yeah.
Or even make corrections every minute, you know?
Yeah. Now, I think if you pay them, you can get a higher rate, right? Because remember that GitHub is a freemium model. So if you pay GitHub, you can get more. But it doesn't matter. Now you're back into complexity. Now you're back into money. Because we have a free account.
Could pay them because I'm looking at the limits on just about GitHub Pages, and it's version free,
you may
Pro,
need
and
to,
Team.
So if you start paying money, you can actually do something really cool. You can use your server to build GitHub Pages. So instead of theirs, you use yours. So you run Jekyll on something sitting in your corporate head office or whatever in your data center. And it connects. So the first piece is on GitHub and the last piece is on GitHub, but the bit in the middle is on your servers. And then you decide how much RAM, how much CPU, and how often it can run.
We don't want to do that. We're
that,
trying to
right?
get away from that kind of
Exactly.
complexity. Right?
Now you've just got the same level of complexity in a different place, and you've got the same level of bills. You're just paying someone else. So why not just use WordPress, right? You probably find better support. The other obvious downside here is that you can't have user comments stored in the actual content. You need to either just decide we do our interaction on Slack or we do our interaction on social media. And in fact, social media has really changed the dynamic here because 20 years ago when I first started blogging, the only way you interacted with bloggers was on their blog. And John Gruber was weird because he never allowed comments. The entire internet ran on comments, apart from Daring Fireball. And the whole universe has kind of gone to the model of the last thing you do is what you do. You pimp it on social media. That's the final step of publishing a post is you pimp it on social media.
But that isn't how I interact. That's how I spam. You know, that's just telling you it's there. That's not the interaction. Very little interaction happens.
But people react to those spam posts. Well, they do to me, mainly because I'm terrible at the comments on my blog. So much so that I've pretty much disabled them. I much prefer to talk to people on Mastodon
sites have
and
them
stuff.
Disabled. It makes me nuts. That just,
like I say,
that shuts down conversation to me. Yeah. And social media's gotten hard now that Twitter's a dumpster fire. So now we don't all have one place to be having the conversation. So I think it's gotten harder.
Changes the dynamic again.
Reverting back. Yeah.
Now, but that isn't your only option because you can also use JavaScript to add cloud-hosted comments. There is a service called Discuss, for example, that lets you put comments on anything. And it's running on the Discuss cloud service, not on your servers. So the fact that it's a static site doesn't matter. You can use Discuss to put comments on anything. It's just a JavaScript call.
So you can put there would be a little Discuss. I never know how to pronounce that.
I just pronounce it Discuss. It's DISQUS, but I just pronounce it Discuss.
So you would see Discuss on a GitHub page.
Yeah. Because what's actually in the source code. Yeah, because what's in the source code is a little JavaScript snippet that says load Discuss here. And it's all done over Ajax.
But you're not writing in JavaScript. You're writing in Markdown.
Right, but how do you put it? The theme is adding in the Discuss script.
Okay. Oh, that makes sense. All right, I got it.
Yeah. And so the user doesn't notice. The user doesn't see.
That's kind of neat.
Yeah, so the user is commenting on your post. But from your point of view, your content is in Git and your comments are in Discuss. So you have now bifurcated those two pieces of content. It's different.
okay.
I mean, some people see that as a good thing. Some people see it as a bad thing. It is just a feature of this choice. And take it or leave it.
I could see the pros of that too, though, is if you've got your conversation and discuss, and let's say you decide to move where you're going to have your website, or you're changing your whole plan of everything you're going to do, you can bring all those people who were talking to you with you. They're portable. And yet to them, they feel like they were only there. That's an interesting idea.
They literally don't know where you're doing your stuff. They're just talking to you. So yeah, you're right. It swings and roundabouts. It absolutely swings and roundabouts. So which to choose is like the eternal question. It's one of those Windows versus Mac questions. There is no right answer, which is great, right? So you can't get it. You can't be universally wrong. You can just make a choice that you end up regretting later, and then you'll probably end up changing your mind. But that's life. And maybe the right answer today is the wrong answer tomorrow. So I would say ask yourself these 6 questions. So the first question to ask is, how often is this website going to get new content? A few posts an hour, a few posts a day, a few posts a week, a few posts a month. That's definitely going to be one of the factors in your decision. Another factor is, how many people are going to be reading your site? Are you going to get thousands of visitors an hour? Or are you going to get a few hundred a week? Now, there's nothing wrong with a few hundred a week, because what I always say to people who look at their site stats and go, oh my God, only 100 people listen to this. It's like, imagine a room and you're standing in front of it. Is 100 people a lot? Yes, it is.
Yeah. Would you feel a little nervous? Then that's a lot of people.
Precisely. And I have given talks to astronomical societies and stuff where 15 people have showed up, and they have been amazing experiences to give those talks, because those 15 people were really keen to hear what I had to say, and we had a fantastic evening. It's not about numbers, right? Don't feel, oh my God, I only have 50 viewers or whatever. It doesn't matter. That's not what it's about. The question is just how many are there, because I need this website to be able to handle that. Do you want comments embedded in your content management system? Do you want comments at all? Do you want them somewhere else? How big of a deal is that, basically? Another important question, how big is my wallet? Like, am I doing this for fun? Am I doing this for work? If I'm doing it for work, I will literally have a budget. I'm literally going to have to stay within a defined amount. That is a factor. What are the technical skills that I have at my disposal? And when I say disposal, I don't mean that I have within me. If I have other resources I can call on, that counts too, right? So if you're part of a team... Do you have a pocket
bill reveal?
Exactly, right? Exactly. So do I have a community where someone in the community has... What skills are in the community? If I'm in an organization, what skills are in the organization? So when you're thinking skills, it's bigger than just you. It's the group of people running this website, what skills are there here? That's a big factor. And then the other thing is, who are your authors and what are their feelings about technology? Because your authors are kind of the most important people on a content management system. It's all good and well to build the most amazing system for displaying content, but if the people writing the content hate it so much they never write a bloody sentence, why? And especially if it's you, right? If you are the people and you hate writing content, you won't. And that's really sad to me, right? I wanted to share something with the world and I don't want to anymore.
I would put this one, the pro and con would be if the authors are not really technical, I don't think I would do GitHub Pages.
Definitely not. It's bad fit.
Okay. I just want to make sure you didn't say which way that one would go. But, one of the best things Bart has done is dragged me kicking and screaming into this is because I use Git all week long. Yeah. I haven't written any code in 6 months. Yeah. Well, for everything I do with you, I do.
But sorry, I meant that in a sort of much more vague way, right? Because if you were going to do like some sort of a knitting pattern that you were saving in some sort of a text file, and you were like, well, what if I mess this up and I want to be able to go back? You might consider throwing it into Git.
I've done a few things like that. I've written some local scripts, and I said, well, I should just have those in Git. Why not?
Right. Yeah,
what's the downside of that? Yeah.
Yeah. So my basic idea is if I'm in a text editor, whatever it is going into Git, and it could be anything, right? It's just whatever is in a text editor to me, off it goes into Git. So the technological skills and preferences of your authors are vital. And I think authors are so important to a content management system. It's kind of for them. Right? That's where the content comes from.
Should be number one. I'm going to add a seventh one on here, and I apologize for not looking this up earlier, but I got curious while we were chatting about what kind of limitations there might be on GitHub Pages. And one of the limitations is the repo can't be bigger than 1 gigabyte. And programming by stealth is past a third of that.
Now, it's a very inefficient repo. We should probably clean a little bit of house in there. But it's a valid point. It is a valid point.
Majority text files. There's very, very few images in here.
Yeah,
but we are at 367.5 megabytes with 1,229 items.
Yeah, those zip files are probably zip files all duplicate the resources. There's a lot of duplication there. So the actual markdown is probably, let's say, 200 megs.
But the zip files are zip files of text. They're not big. There's just a lot of them because you've done a lot of work. I don't know that it is as inefficient as you think, but it's something to keep in mind. If
it is,
for example, I can tell you, looking at that number, podfeed.com would not fit in that number in 1 gigabyte because I put 10 images in a single blog post. If you ever want to put a single video into a post, you're limited to 100 megabytes, dead stop, but you're going to get a warning at 50 megabytes. So if you are going to have video, or what you can do, they suggest, ChatGPT tells me, go put those files someplace else. They can be in Google Drive or in Amazon AWS or wherever you can have those hosted someplace CDN, else. In fact. Just links. Literally anything. But it is something to keep in mind that you've got to, have that in your mind that you might have a little added complexity if I have to keep my other stuff, the media has to live someplace else. But if we can generate a third of a gigabyte with text, that's something to
we've
think
been at
about.
it a few years.
Yeah, we have.
But no, it's a very valid point, right? Scale is absolutely a thing. And what I think is really interesting is that at the extremes, this is always an easy answer. So, I'm Ars Technica, what should I do? There's not even a question. There's only one answer for a site like Ars Technica. If you go on the other extreme, like a website that's really popular, but it has one author and a really low volume of posts, like John Gruber, he has to make his living on his own. For him, it's also a no-brainer. But most of us live in the annoying grey bit in the middle where both answers are viable. So we actually have to think about this, which is kind of annoying. It'd be easier if I could just say, and the answer is, ta-da! But it isn't. It's way more complicated than that. So I guess to bring us back to why you might want to pay attention. So this entire series is dedicated to one half of this universe, the static site generator half. So if you answer the questions in such a way that you just don't think static site generators are ever going to be for you, well, I guess you can tune out until episode whatever when we go back to PowerShell next. But before you leave, let me try give you a sales pitch, because while GitHub Pages may not solve every problem you have, it may solve at least one problem you have. And depending on your level of nerdiness, and you are listening to something called Programming by Stealth, so there is an amount, certainly not zero, you may have little projects which can make use of GitHub Pages, even if you also make use of WordPress and stuff for bigger projects. So the first thing I love about GitHub Pages is the word free. Because of its simple architecture and because GitHub have a freemium model. So GitHub is, I did a thing on Security Bits ages ago where I broke business models into what I call freepy. And so you could have basically the scary ones are free without sustainability because they are either going to explode and leave you high and dry, or they're just gathering information to sell you and all of your data to someone else to cash out, and either way you lose.
Right.
But the safe kind of free is either a charity like Wikipedia, which GitHub is not, or a business with a solid business model, which includes a free tier. And that is GitHub Pages. That is all of GitHub, in fact, because once you get serious, like there are giant projects hosted on GitHub. They're not hosted for free. They are using GitHub's advanced features. They're breaking through the free limits. They're paying. I choose to pay because I want GitHub to be successful. So I choose the lowest subscription tier, and it gives me a cool bonus features that I use about 1% of. But, anyway, that's me, right? But it is a viable, safe, free option for hosting static content. So literally everything we have done in Programming by Stealth up to now has been static content. We have never gone to the server side. All we have done is HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. We've done some really powerful HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, but it's all on the client side, which means it can all go on GitHub Pages. So that's something. If you're writing code, right? If you're the kind of nerd who looks for a JavaScript module to do something, doesn't exist, you write it and you share it. The difference between a module used by 5 people and 500 people is usually the documentation. If I go to a random library and I need to figure out how to use it and is this thing mature, I'm going to look at the docs. If they exist, it's at least mature. And I can tell whether it solves my problem. If there's no docs, I'm just moving on. It's like, I don't know what this is, but whatever it is, it isn't fully baked. And so if you have your code in GitHub, why not just make a folder called docs, put in even just a simple HTML page with like a little 5-liner on how to use it, right? It doesn't have to be a lot. You just get a free web page to describe your code, just your documentation, just include it in your repo. And the great thing is it's in the one repo. So the act of updating your code and the act of updating your docs are together. So you can just do it all and publish.
No, you said HTML. It can be Markdown.
It can be Markdown, yes. But, in the absolute simplest way, right? You just write some HTML. But yeah, you just write some Markdown, right? Index.md and you're away. And it'll just work. Yeah, absolutely. And like I say, you're the perfect example. So your elapsed time adder is a web app written using the technologies we've covered in Programming by Stealth, hosted on the internet with GitHub Pages. Right? You have published a real app for real people on the real internet, and you haven't paid a penny.
That's right. And it's really fun to me to be able to tell like my old friends that I'll run into, haven't talked to in a long time, 20 years or something, saying, hey, this is what I do now. I'm a developer, even though I haven't written any code in 6 months.
Yeah, but you can. Right? To me, a developer is someone who runs into an itch, looks to see if anyone else has scratched it, finds no one else has, and has the power to do it.
I was really excited. I don't know why I started looking for, I was trying to type in, remember what the vanity URL I had for my time adder, elapsed time adder was. And I couldn't, and I typed it in wrong and I got somebody else's that's supposed to do the same thing. And first of all, it's all crapped up with ads and it doesn't know how to do subtraction. It did have kind of a nice format output though, that I might steal the idea. So, I mean,
copying,
repurposed making my, something similar.
Yeah. And then the final thing is, if you're the kind of person who's been enjoying Programming by Stealth, especially everything we've done with Git in the last 2 years or so, this is a technology stack you like. So it may just be a good fit for you conceptually. You may just be the kind of person who likes to work this way, in which case this could be a low friction way to have a web presence of some kind. So, do bear that in mind.
You mentioned the publishing process, keeping things in draft mode. That would just be branches that were unpublished or not merged into main.
Yes,
right?
Exactly. So with GitHub Pages, you choose a branch to act as the input to the static site generator. So every other branch, by definition, is a draft.
Unpublished. Okay.
It's unpublished.
Yeah.
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 Okay, so before we wrap up for today, let's just zoom out. I'm just going to draw you a vague sketch of this cool house we're going to build together over the next couple of installments. So just a vague sketch, just so that we all understand which room we're in at each point in our journey. So again, at its core, GitHub Pages takes content that is somehow stored inside the GitHub repository and turns it into a web page on the intranet sitting on GitHub's infrastructure. And the piece between the two is a CI/CD pipeline implemented using GitHub Actions. So GitHub Actions with a capital A is like a product/feature within the GitHub universe. And GitHub Pages is, I guess, a feature within the GitHub universe.
Do we need to keep saying CI/CD? Can we start saying GitHub Actions at this point?
After today, we totally can, because after today, we're unabashedly diving into the GitHub universe. But I'm trying to be, everything I've said today is actually very generic. It's from this bullet point down, this level 2 heading down is now all GitHub specific. So yes,
This
from
double
now on.
Octothorpe down.
Yes,
no, you've
exactly.
been doing exactly what you've always said the purpose of this podcast was to teach us to program, not teach us languages. So keeping it generic, saying CI/CD like GitHub Actions, CI/CD like GitHub Actions. Now we're okay to say GitHub Actions, but in the back of our brain, we'll keep saying CI/CD. And I'll always remember that it was a committee decision on the name.
There you go.
By the way, I know you're still trying to do the overview, but I want to tease you one little bit. In the show notes, Bart didn't say it out loud. I was waiting for him to say it. He said that CI/CD is all bread and butter stuff for sysadmins. I wanted to go back and see if you had ever fully explained to me what CI/CD was, and I found you talked about it in Programming by Stealth 116, 117, 172, and 174. And in 172, you said, and I quote, "This is all bread and butter stuff for sysadmins."
Well, I'm very consistent. I don't change my metaphors very often.
Right. Okay. So now I'm going to get you back to where you were going. We're going to be using GitHub Actions, which are a CI/CD, and that's going to do the actual building of the published pages.
Yes. And GitHub Actions are very, very flexible. So you can put anything between content in GitHub repo and published web page on GitHub Pages. You could write any action you like and do anything in between. But there's a default something in between, which involves no work. And that default something in between is a tweaked and augmented version of an open source static site generator, which is called Jekyll. And
I thought Jekyll was the theme. No, Jekyll is the static site generator.
It is. And GitHub have technically branched the open source project. So their Jekyll is like GitHub Pages flavored Jekyll. So it has some extra superpowers because it knows GitHub as well as everything else Jekyll does. So we're going to learn about those little subtleties later.
We have talked about static site generators in another context. The documentation for XKPassWD is written with a static site generator Doxify. And I tested a whole bunch of different ones before I settled on Doxify.
Yeah, exactly. And it does exactly the same thing, right? A folder of content as markdown files into pretty web page in HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So that is absolutely a static site generator. That one's kind of cool because it does the conversion client side. It's actually, you don't have to render it, right? The browser does it.
Yes.
It's done in JavaScript, which is kind of, and read time static site generator, which is a wonderful hybrid. Let's not complicate things with that. It does the same job.
Right.
Now, you raised an interesting point because I had written the show notes and I had hand waved over a subtlety because I didn't know if we wanted to talk about it. And then you basically put a giant big comment and said, Bart, something here doesn't make sense. Connect the pieces for me. So the hand waving is gone. Everything you do, unless you write your own GitHub action, is using Jekyll, but Jekyll may be hiding. It may be hiding very, very well. So your elapsed time adder is using Jekyll, but you literally never noticed because what Jekyll does is it looks to see, does this input contain finished HTML, CSS, and JavaScript that doesn't need converting? If the answer to that question is yes, it just takes the input and turns it into the output. So it's the world's dumbest static site generator. It's called copy. Copy the content of the repository, stick it onto GitHub Pages. But
so our fancy
Jekyll did the
CI/CD
copy.
is copy?
Yeah, effectively, yes. But Jekyll did that.
Just for clarification, GitHub itself, when I created a release, I was able to say, take that release and make it into a web page.
Yes. Yeah. But the action that does the translating is using Jekyll.
It's a copy. Huh.
And Jekyll is basically looking at every file going, does this contain YAML front matter or liquid template strings? And if the answer is no, it does nothing. It just copies it.
Okay. That's funny. I did not know Jekyll was involved. That's cool.
Yeah, and it's intentionally getting out of your way. It's intentionally in, I call it pass-through mode. It's just, I'll just take it in and put it out. Don't worry about it. But of course, it has Jekyll, which means that it can do more, right? Now, so let's zoom back a little because we're going to do two things in this series. So the first thing is that GitHub action could be anything. So we've already learned how to write CSS, HTML, and JavaScript, and we've learned how to bundle all of our external dependencies into our web app using Webpack. And so Webpack takes the raw code in your Git repository and then bundles all of that into a finished web app. So having Webpack between your raw code and your website is a great way that you don't have to worry about getting the latest version of Node.js and stuff. You can let NPM handle all of that and then have NPM call Webpack and have Webpack build your updated website. So that's a different middle piece. But you just implement that middle piece with GitHub Actions. You just don't use Jekyll, don't use the default. Say, I'll write my own. And then you just put a few little blocks in that say, do this, do this, do this. Basically, that will do the Webpack stuff. And then you'll have a different translation between content of repository, published web page.
So if you did the Webpack bundling locally, like the way we learned how to do it, then when you pushed it up, it would go to the Jekyll would go, copy.
Yeah. Yeah. And so the other option is to replace Jekyll, not do it yourself, and let GitHub Actions automate it. And so that's what we're going to learn in PBS 176, i.e. next time. And that's just puts a little bow on things, right? That takes everything we've learned so far in programming by stealth and really finishes it to the point where you have a truly professional finished web page and you've done it using all the correct software engineering tool chain. So that just puts a lovely bow on everything we've done so far. And that's going to take us just one installment because actually GitHub Actions is very powerful and that do the Webpack thing is actually quite easy to do. I was really pleased when writing those show notes that it just kind of works. I was shocked. Yeah, very shocked.
50.
So we're going to spend the vast majority of this series learning how to make Jekyll not be in pass-through mode, but to actually enable its content management brain. So it can do the full content management thing as a full static site generator. And so that means that it takes Markdown files sitting in your repository, runs them through a theme of your choosing or making. So there is a default theme that GitHub Pages just has. So you get a theme for free. It's pretty boring and basic, but you don't get nothing, right? You get something. You also get the ability to just point at someone else's theme. You can literally just tell it, this GitHub repository, username / repository name, use that theme. So you can use any other theme anywhere in GitHub for your website. Or you can write your own, which is what we did, which I did a decade ago for Programming by Stealth. That's why Programming by Stealth doesn't look like a WordPress site or does't look like someone else's GitHub pages. It's our site. Right? I didn't do it great, but it is pretty. I stand by it being pretty.
It's got good colors.
Yeah. So to do its work, when you have Jekyll doing its true work to be a content management system, it has to have a theme, and that theme has to be able to take the markdown, convert it to HTML, and also do things like insert the menu across the top, which is dynamic, right? So it's using a taxonomy called Pages, which you'll recognize as a WordPress user, to build that menu. There's another taxonomy called, in our case, we made a customized taxonomy called PBS. So the index of all of our episodes is also being injected onto that homepage. And there's another taxonomy for the tidbits. They're also being injected in. And we have a third taxonomy for the authors. When you go to the About page, that's also being injected in there. So it's 3 taxonomies.
And that's something we used to do by hand, type in that index. And Bart, I only messed it up like 1 time out of 5. Seriously, I don't know what the big deal was.
Yeah, I know. We're on episode 175, so that's only, oh dear.
Maybe 1 out of 6.
That act of inserting the metadata and the taxonomy into your theme, that's the same problem to be solved as we were doing with mustache templates in JavaScript. Right? You need to be able to take some stuff from over here, take an array, make it pretty and stuff. And it doesn't use mustache. So Jekyll uses a different language that does something really similar to mustache. And the syntax is similar enough that you're either going to hate it or love it, because it also uses 2 curly braces. But inside the 2 curly braces, it's a little bit different. So that may make your head explode, or you may just feel at home because, hey, look, curlies. I like those. By the way, it uses a different language, which is called Liquid. And Liquid is kind of cool because it has it has a lot of resources behind it because it's what powers Shopify. So anyone who's made a web shop on Shopify and skinned Shopify, all of the customizations you do in a Shopify site are in Liquid. So that same language is in Jekyll, which is kind of cool. And the Liquid people don't like reinventing the wheel. So they just took a whole bunch of data transformation functionality straight from another open source project called Jinja 2. So Liquid uses Jinja 2 filters to manipulate data. So you literally could say, make title case or whatever might be a Jinja 2 filter that you can use inside your mustache. So you might take the title of the post, run it through make title case, and then include it in your theme. You just
said mustache. Do you mean your Liquid template?
Yes, I do. Okay. Like I say, curly
And
braces, very confusing.
You didn't explicitly say it, but I'm assuming Liquid, even though it's created by Shopify, is open source?
Correct. Yes, it is. I'm trying to remember, like a lot of the big open source things we use have a big backer because it was someone's problem to solve and they chose to solve it open source. And so that's what happened here.
Sure. Just want to make sure I knew that one for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Another thing that you get for free with Jekyll is something I have been itching to tell you about because it makes web design way easier, is something called a CSS preprocessor. So the CSS language is very clunky and it doesn't let you have things like variables or loops and things where you want to do the similar thing multiple times. Like if you think about Bootstrap, how many things have dash primary in it, dash warning, dash secondary, dash error, right? How many things inside Bootstrap use those same words to mean make it blue, make it gray, make it red, make it green, make it yellow? They're not copying and pasting. They're using a CSS preprocessor to write that logic once, run it through a for loop. And so the input is this other language which has loops, and the output is valid CSS. So it's a way of expanding simplified CSS into valid CSS the browser can talk to. That's why it's called a preprocessor. So you're compiling this other language into CSS, and that CSS goes onto your web page. And the one that Jekyll uses is the one. There used to be 2 big ones, and one of them, they merged actually to become one project. It's called SASS, SASS. So not software as a service, which is SaaS, it's SaaS. And I think the idea is that it's sassy because it's got style. I think that's the logic. That's how I remember it anyway.
Maybe we'll be able to remember it that way. I guarantee I'll forget and get them mixed up. But I think for this instant in time, sassy, that does help.
Good. Now, GitHub Pages and Jekyll in no way enforce Bootstrap. But we have become very comfortable with Bootstrap. We think of the universe in terms of Bootstrap. It's so easy to take an idea and just make it pretty. The PBS website is using Bootstrap 4, another thing that needs updating, because we're on to Bootstrap 5 now.
How are we already behind?
I know.
Just got here.
I know. We have been using about a third of Bootstrap's ability. We have just been using the pre-built Bootstrap, which gives us the default state of Bootstrap, which is already spectacularly powerful. But remember I said that Bootstrap isn't written in CSS, it's actually written in Sass. And then the result is the compiled Sass, which is what we download and stick onto our various projects, or we load using a CDN URL. Well, it's actually built so that what you can do is take Bootstrap Sass and then make your own Sass to tweak the Bootstrap Sass in a really controlled way. They've basically written their Sass to be extensible. And so you can literally, like, you know the way everything has a dash primary or whatever, you could make a dash podfeet version and just add a sixth color to everything by just adding a new variable with a new color into a hash table, into a dictionary, and saying rerun Bootstrap. And now everything that has a dash primary will also have a dash podfeet, which will be whatever color you like. Maybe that nice shade of red you use in your website, right?
That's fun. I like that.
This really opens things up. It also means that if you think primary should be a lovely shade of purple, you can just change the variable that says what it means to be primary to be your lovely shade of purple. And then everything in Bootstrap with dash primary becomes purple. Right. So did you ever notice the Bootstrap web page is written in Bootstrap, but it's these lovely purple colors instead of the default blue? It's because they use the full power of Bootstrap. They use the Sass customizability. And so we get to do that too. And Jekyll and GitHub Pages just do that. They just have that built in. So it's just part of the build process. So we can just use that in our themes. So if we lay it all out as all of the technologies involved here, we have Git and GitHub, which we have absolutely covered, right? We have spent many, many installments learning about these things. So that's a big green tick mark in the show notes. We have never looked at GitHub Actions. So we are going to do that next installment. So that is new knowledge that currently has a red X because we don't know anything about it yet. But I can tell you now that when we do use GitHub Actions, we're going to be doing a lot of YAML, which is one of the many reasons I've snuck it in last year. I was very keen to get that under our belt for many reasons, and this is just another reason. So GitHub Actions is written in YAML. We're going to use GitHub Actions to publish with Webpack, which means we need to use Node.js and NPM, which we all covered when learning about Webpack. So that's a green tick. That's a skill set we've already covered. The stuff for building our themes are going to be HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. No problem there.
Ching.
Yeah. Bootstrap. Well, yeah, we've covered Bootstrap. We haven't done Bootstrap customization, so that's one we have to learn, which means we have to learn Sass in order to be able to customize our Bootstrap. Jekyll we have not learned yet, so that's a big X, but it's built on YAML, big tick box on that one. Markdown, yeah, we've done that a few times. HTML, CSS, and JavaScript is the basis of most of the theme, tick. Liquid templates, brand new to us. Jinja 2 within Liquid templates, brand new to us. And also any customized Sass we do, brand new to us. So you can see here why I say we have a few things to learn here.
You know what I love that Bart did here? He's got a nice checklist here so we can see all the pieces we're going to learn. And as he walked through each one of these things, the paragraphs above, he has links to where you can go back and remember, wait, how did we do Webpack? Oh, that's in 137, 138, and 139. Where did we learn about YAML? 168, 169. He's got links back to those. So if you're going, oh, I forgot how to do that. Or maybe I'm the only one who forgets everything. But yeah, there's links to go back and see it again.
I spent a lot of time rereading the posts on Webpack because we haven't done that very much.
Because they're really well done.
That's true, yeah. So that is basically what we're going to do. And it's not going to be like a 50-50 split between doing stuff not with Jekyll and with Jekyll. It really is going to be a 10-90 split, right? So we're going to cover the not Jekyll stuff in PBS 176, and then we're done. And from then on, we're going to focus entirely on using Jekyll as a full content management system. And we're going to build up our stuff piece by piece to create a website with content management features, with taxonomies, with our own theme. And I think that's really important to have our own theme. So it's ours. We get to build our website. This is so
fun, Bart. I am so excited about this. This is going to be great. I've talked to Bart in the background about how if I can't see it, it's harder for me to believe it. Like, I don't know that I would really enjoy learning the database side of things because I think that's a little more, when you get into back-end development, you don't get to see the flashy stuff in the front. I want to be the flashy stuff in the front person.
I'm also going to flag something else we're going to focus on very heavily in this series, which is going to make you happy. It's going to give you instant gratification. When you set things up correctly from day one, which unfortunately for PBS is a decade ago before I knew what correctly was, but when you start fresh, you can set up your GitHub Pages content management system in such a way that you can both run Jekyll locally to test everything and have Jekyll run automatically in GitHub Pages.
Nice.
So you can literally just push a button locally to say, show me the finished website, and it will show you it locally, and then you can see when there's a formatting problem or whatever, fix it, and only when you're finished, push. And then the same process will happen on the cloud that you just checked down locally.
Well, especially with the 10 builds per hour limitation, you want to be able to do it locally. That's really cool. That's excellent. That's kind of analogous to running MAMP or WAMP or LAMP
exactly
locally.
Analogous, yeah.
And for running WordPress or running web server and being able to build things locally and then push it up after you get it fixed.
Yeah.
Could not be more excited. This is super fun, Bart.
Excellent. Well, I'm glad you're looking forward to it. I think we set it up nicely, and I've just noticed that my voice is getting all scratchy and stuff, so this is the perfect length of episode.
All right. Well, cool. We'll talk to you in a couple of weeks.
In a couple of weeks' time, when we're going to tie a little bow on our web app stuff so that we can really get professional and publish our web apps using GitHub Actions with Webpack, and we get to learn GitHub Actions in the process. So that's next time. And until then, happy computing.
If you learn as much from Bart each week as I do, I'd like you to go over to lets-talk.ie and press one of the buttons over there to help support him. He does 98% of the work here. I'm just the stooge that listens to him and asks the dumb questions. If you go over to lets-talk.ie, you can support him on Patreon, you can donate via PayPal, or you can use one of his referral links. I really hope you'll go over and help him out. In the meantime, you can contact me at Podfeet or check out all of the shows we do over there over at podfeet.com. Thanks for listening and stay subscribed.